to get good rest.
What if I have a bad dream?
We're not like any other family. We're different. Because of where we grew up. Hill House.
Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within.
It's that house.
There's something down here. You're scared, I can tell.
You don't have to worry now, sweetie.
Hey everyone, it's Soul here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Halloween has passed, but the scares certainly have not, as today we are going to be looking at the fall of the House of Usher once more, but this time in comparison to Mike Flanagan's first Netflix hit, The Haunting of Hill House. It goes without saying that both of these shows are absolutely amazing in their own right, but what is interesting to me is how Mike has essentially put out a brand new horror TV show almost every single year on Netflix with The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, and The Midnight Club. But The Fall of the House of Usher is the only one to have gained anywhere near the international success of The Haunting of Hill House. So it kinda got me thinking, which one is better? How do these two shows compete on a technical level? In which areas do these shows pull forward and ahead of the other? And which one is better overall in my opinion? Let's find out, shall we? Real quick before we do though, I will be continuing my Wednesday night live streams at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm really enjoying hanging out and talking to you guys. I will be continuing to play Five Nights at Freddy's. I am on to the second game out of all 4, and I really hope to see you guys all there. Now, as always, please remember to hit that like button, click subscribe to see more videos from me, and leave a comment down below. Here is your one and only warning that this video contains spoilers. Alright, grab a seat in your haunted house of choice and let's strap in. The Fall of the House of Usher and The Haunting of Hill House are both monumental shows. They are huge successes in their respective release times, and I feel that both shows have a sort of groundbreaking element or elevated aspect in the writing or the production. In The Haunting of Hill House, I definitely think this was made in the production stages, since everyone everywhere seemed to be talking about the hidden ghost and the conveniently placed statues and props that are meant to recreate the feeling of something being in the corner of your eye by having actual actors or things in the edges and backgrounds of the scenes. Not only was it very effective in creating that sort of uneasy and scary feeling for us viewers, but it also became a bit of a game as people would rewatch the show to try and find all of the hidden ghosts. As for The Fall of the House of Usher, I definitely think that this elevated feeling comes from the fact that the writers and producers have gone to such length and depths in order to include and honor a lot of original works by Edgar Allan Poe. This show really is the perfect union of literary fans and horror buffs alike. So like I said, both shows are fantastic in their own rights, but I really want to try and compare them. So for this, I'm going to go through certain categories and talk about how each show used and performed in them, and then pick a winner for each category. If you haven't seen my video discussing The Fall of the House of Usher, go check it out as I will probably be making some references or callbacks to it. Now for my comparisons today, I will be looking at 5 different categories: the pacing of the show, the characters, character depths, character backgrounds and details, the scares, and not just comparing the jump scares, I want to look at all of the creepy vibes and the sort of overall horror elements. The next category will be creativity, in regards to not only the creativity in terms of writing, but also the visual aspects in regards to the sets and the costumes. The 5th and final category will be my personal immersion and viewing experience of the shows. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, the setup for the pacing of the two shows is actually pretty similar. both shows essentially jump through 3 different timelines. You have the distant past, in which we follow the children's experiences in The Haunting of Hill House, and in the House of Usher, we get to follow along with Madeline and Roderick's rise to power. Then you have the not-so-distant past in the much more recent past timeline, in the form of the Ushers dying off one by one, or the Crane children as adults watching their recent life events, such as Theo's daily life or Luke's experiences in rehab. Then last but not least, we have the present-day timeline, in which Roderick and Dupont are talking in the House of Usher, and in The Haunting of Hill House, we have the present-day events that follow all of the Crane children in the family from the moment that Eleanor has died. Another similarity in this sort of setup for the pacing of these shows is that each episode is dedicated to a particular character, with the House of Usher being dedicated to whoever is dying in that episode, and in The Haunting of Hill House, to whichever character we get a little bit more background information and context on. Yet, while the writing and setup for the pacing is very similar, the action and the sort of climactic moments that drive the plotline and therefore the pacing forward take place in different timelines. In the fall of the House of Usher, these driving moments are in the more recent past. The present-day events are very stagnant as we get to just watch Roderick and Dupont talk. The real heart of the story is the children. Even when we get the information on Roderick in that last episode, all of his stuff is told from the point of view that he is telling this to Dupont, and is therefore portrayed to us as viewers through this recent past timeline. And while the distant past with Madeline and Roderick being young, that is very interesting, we definitely know that they somehow managed to gain control, and so that just becomes a bit of a character development and background information plotline, rather than a driving force to push the energy and the plotline along. As for The Haunting of Hill House, the driving events take place in the present-day timeline. We get pulled in by the story of the Crane family as we watch them deal with their sister's sudden death. Meanwhile, both of the past timelines, the distant and more recent past, they give the much-needed character details and background, as well as some scares here and there, but the driving moments and the climactic events are very much in the present timeline. With them being in the present, I definitely felt a bit more of a natural progression of growth as the story went on. I don't want to say it's stereotypical, but to some extent it is that stereotypical and almost expected pacing outline, with this natural progression and growth in which the show is sort of building to this giant moment, which ends up being the Crane family going back to Hill House. This sort of natural progression is something that I felt was definitely missing in the fall of the House of Usher. No matter how well the pacing was in each particular episode, the pacing throughout the whole season just fell a bit short. When it comes to the pacing of this show, I definitely think that the setup of the writing and the story itself has kind of created this sort of cyclical, and the only way I can describe it is this chugging along sensation to the pacing of each episode, due to the fact that each episode you get this sort of mini event. You get the growth, introduction, and development of each and every single Usher child that ultimately ends with them dying. It creates these sort of little hills and bumps that don't really push the overall pacing and plotline continuously through the entire season. I think the fact that we know that all of the children end up dead sort of takes away some amount of the stakes that we might have felt during each child's episode. It takes away that feeling and fear of the unknown that we feel during Hill House, because we don't know, since it's in the present day, we don't know if the children are going to survive their encounter at Hill House. Whereas in the House of Usher, we know that all of the Usher children are ending up dead, since that's how we start off the series in the present day, with Roderick telling us that they are all dead. We have essentially lost the stakes and therefore the building block feeling of growth of the unknown. And so because of that, the ending of the House of Usher, while it was really cool, definitely felt a bit underwhelming, since there wasn't as much of a build-up as there was in The Haunting of Hill House. So because of this, Hill House takes the prize in this first category. When looking at these characters, this is a bit difficult for me to pick. I praised the fall of the House of Usher a lot in my video of it for how they are able to create such a detailed character that we as viewers can quickly connect to and then have an emotional reaction to their death, whether that was feeling bad for them or being happy or at least feeling that their death was justified. It is just insanely impressive, given the size of this cast, that they are able to do that for every single Usher. I love the detail that we also get of Roderick and Madeline's relationship. We get a lot of information on how Madeline is really the one in charge, even though Roderick is perceived to be the one in charge. I definitely think that the sibling interactions and details between their relationship is outstanding. I think with the fall of the House of Usher, it's really interesting to see how every single Usher child is impacted by their father's neglect. I think that's definitely a theme that we see a lot of the siblings argue over, as they are essentially fighting for their father's approval or attention. And like I said again, the fact that they are able to do this for all 6 children, as well as you have the characters of Arthur Pym and Madeline and Roderick and even Dupont himself, it's just all really impressive, the amount of detail that they're able to do in such a short amount of dialogue and scenes for some characters. Now, in terms of The Haunting of Hill House, I think that the family dynamic is absolutely incredible. It is a story about a family's trauma, and we once again get to see how that manifests in each and every child. But what takes these sort of characters a step further is how they start to react to the real fears that they end up facing. It's not just a story about how they were as children and how they are as adults. There is a sort of second transition once they realize that they are up against some sort of supernatural power in the form of Hill House itself. We get a sort of added level of character development from that plotline. But like I said in the beginning of this section, this is really, really difficult for me to pick because I really loved both of these family dynamics. Even though the Usher family is very broken and disjointed, it is really enjoyable to watch all of these characters bounce off of each other, whereas in The Haunting of Hill House, the family dynamic is still very disjointed, but in a much more realistic sort of dynamic. And I think simply because of the fact that The Haunting of Hill House has a much more real feeling to it, and especially since the Usher family is just so wealthy, a lot of the arguments and characterizations are just, I don't want to say blown out of proportion, but a bit extreme. I think because Haunting of Hill House feels a bit more realistic in terms of the everyday family, I am going to pick The Haunting of Hill House as the winner of this section. The characterization and how they handle the trauma of their childhood and the recent traumatic event of their sister passing away in such a heartbreaking and, once again, traumatic location. It's just really impressive how the writers are able to create these characters with such detail and depth to their own individual trauma. And while the size of the cast and characters isn't nearly as large as the House of Usher, The Haunting of Hill House still has 7 main characters, and the detail and depth that they go to in this trauma is just so impressive. Moving on to the scares, there are so many scares in this show, and honestly, this is probably the most difficult category that I have to decide on, simply because the type of scares and the overall horror elements and vibes that these two shows give off are very different. The Haunting of Hill House, while it definitely has some incredible jump scares, with this one in particular being regarded as the best jump scare in all of history, but the show as a whole tends to use a lot more tension building and subtle creeps throughout the show. Meanwhile, the House of Usher tends to use a lot more large-scale scares and arguably a bit more of the stereotypical jump scares, and definitely a lot more gore than Hill House. Like I said, the two shows are very different in genres of horror. And while I know I have a category at the end for my personal experience and feelings while watching the show, both of these shows drew such a visceral reaction out of me throughout their different types of scares. When viewing The Haunting of Hill House, I definitely felt immensely creeped out and uneasy throughout almost the entirety of the show. Meanwhile, The House of Usher, I felt a lot more uneasy, but in terms of feeling almost sick and disgusted with the extent that this show goes to. But I think that the fact that they have such gory extremes and they sort of sit in these uncomfortable moments, to me, The House of Usher is so incredible and daring and really impressive for doing all that. And I think that I just have to give this win to The Fall of the House of Usher for really sitting and sinking into these gory and uncomfortable deaths and moments. Obviously, I talked a lot about in my video how Perry's death is so incredibly disgusting and gory, but I also think there's so many other moments. We have Tamara Lane's death, we have Madeline getting her eyes plucked out, essentially, by Roderick in the last episode. There's a lot of these sort of disgusting and really brutal deaths that a lot of other horror shows just won't go to that extreme. And the fact that this show sits in it, we get to see even Frederick's death slowly creeping in on him while he can't move. That level of being trapped and feeling such discomfort while watching is just something I've never ever experienced before in any sort of horror game or horror television show or film. So that definitely sets it apart as the winner. Moving on to the fourth category, creativity. I feel like if you watched my other video, you will probably know where this one is going. Now, as a casual fan of Edgar Allan Poe, and by casual, I mean I'm literally obsessed with like only 3 of his works, and then I know maybe a small handful of others, but that's about it. But for me, I think this category is just an instant win for The Fall of the House of Usher. The creativity that is necessary in order to write this script and include so many of Poe's works is just so impressive. The set itself for The Fall of House of Usher are also visually stunning, with a lot of the character deaths being very much works of art. Tamara Lane's death in particular is visually stunning with the vibrant green and the crystal-like fragments of the glass. Now, don't get me wrong, The Haunting of Hill House had some great sets, and the house itself was incredible. The idea of the house, well, sort of digesting the people or trapping them there, that sort of mystery is insanely fascinating and creative, as well as the new element in the production that I mentioned earlier with the conveniently placed props and statues on set, as well as the actors being ever so slightly out of frame or in the edges of a scene to create a new way of scaring and setting the viewer's nerves on edge. That is definitely creative, but for me, nothing compares on a creative level to how much time had to be spent in order to mix in so many of Poe's works into one beautifully crafted story that not only is just a tribute to Poe, but is a full story on its own. It doesn't feel like this fragmented piece with bits and pieces taken from Poe's works, but it is a complete story that is well written, that is just packed full with a lot of the creative elements from Poe's works. And I think that balance and effort in terms of the writing is why The Fall of the House of Usher definitely takes the lead in this category. So in case you didn't notice, we currently have ourselves a bit of a tie with The Haunting of Hill House winning in regards to the pacing and the characters, and The Fall of the House of Usher winning the creativity and the scares category. So here we are with the last category, my overall immersion and viewing experience of these shows. Now, this category is obviously based on my own experience, so you guys can 100% disagree with me in the comments section down below, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But for me, this is a very clear winner. And sadly, The Fall of the House of Usher, I was just not nearly as sucked into the plotline and immersed as I was when viewing The Haunting of Hill House. I literally could not look away from the screen when I first watched The Haunting of Hill House. I watched it in one night, in one go, right when it had come out, and I remember because I had annoyed my college roommate because I was so scared to have the lights off, so I watched the whole show with the lights on in my tiny little dorm room, and I didn't finish watching the show until like 5 a.m. So my poor roommate had to fall asleep with the lights on. I'm so sorry about that. But I just couldn't look away. I had to know what would happen to these characters and what they were dealing with in regards to this house and their mother. It was just such a captivating storyline, and the mystery of it all was so well done. Now, don't get me wrong, the fall of the House of Usher was so enjoyable and obviously very scary to watch and made me, like I said, feel almost sick, which was definitely a very unique and fascinating experience to have when watching a show. But I think for me, the pacing really affected me negatively and made it very easy for me to stop after each episode. Since we know that all of the Usher children are dead in the present day, I just didn't feel a strong pull or sense of mystery to the show. The driving factor for how each Usher would die was definitely exciting and tense to see play out, but with each episode ending on this sort of mini conclusion with the character's death, and with the present day timeline of Roderick and Dupont being so stagnant and not really building too much in regards of tension and mystery, it definitely made it feel a bit easier and a bit more natural to stop watching and take breaks and be able to continue on with whatever it is I was doing in my daily life after every single episode. The overall mysteries of Verna and what it is that Roderick and Madeline had done in order to become in power, they just weren't strong enough to carry me over and pull me into the next episode immediately after the end of another episode. I also think that the clues of Verna being this sort of karma-like figure was hinted at so strongly that it kind of took away some of the mystery surrounding her character, since right away with Perry's death, we get the idea that it is the actions of Roderick that have caused this, and she's not just some overtly antagonistic character who is pure evil. There is some sort of act and karma in the works. Also, I don't know if this was just me or not, but the distant past in which we follow Roderick and Madeline's plot to take over the company, those flashbacks kind of started to bore me after a little bit. And while I didn't know how they would be able to do it, you do know that they eventually take over the company. The only interesting part to me was the fact and addition of Annabelle Lee in regard to Roderick's character development. But that was also a bit underwhelming since we didn't really get a flashback or cutscene to their relationship and interactions ending. It's not like we saw Annabelle's death. There wasn't a big payoff to their relationship, in my opinion. I feel it definitely would have been a lot more impactful if we maybe saw Annabelle's death instead of just seeing her ghost coming up to Roderick. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, all in all, I was not nearly as immersed in the fall of House of Usher simply because there was not nearly as much mystery as there was in the present day timeline of The Haunting of Hill House. And with all of that said, The Haunting of Hill House still ranks supreme with its amazing story about family, trauma, mystery, and so much more. It is a show that I will have at the top of my list for probably a long time. Now, as always, while I like to try and add in some writing techniques and outlines, these are purely based around my own opinions, and I would absolutely love to hear what you guys think down below. Do you agree with this list? Are there other categories we should be comparing these two shows on? And just let me know which of the two shows did you guys like better. So if you guys liked my discussion, please hit that like button down below and leave your thoughts in the comment section. While you're down there, click subscribe to see more videos from me, and turn on notifications if you want to be notified whenever I post a new video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you future souls next time. Bye, guys!